You turn on your computer, log into your OS, and open up your web browser. You want to know what's going on in the world, so you visit the Googles and type in latest news. Sadly, however, all you seem to get served is detestable propaganda. Stories such as, Jill Biden's White House holiday decorations once again strike a homier note than Melania Trump's. You quickly realise that you aren't going to be finding out what's really going on. Mission failed, we'll get 'em next time. You then decide you want to watch some cool videos, so you visit the YouTubes and check out the homepage. Unfortunately, however, all you seem to find is slime tutorials, terrible memes, Fortnite gaming, awful comedy, and those same damn propaganda outlets from earlier that you just tried to get away from. You quickly realise that you aren't going to be watching any cool videos. Mission failed, we'll get 'em next time. You then decide that you want to buy some cool stuff, so you visit the Amazons and check out what's recommended. Shockingly, however, you don't really want to buy a spy machine, a face diaper, nor a book written by a treasonous grifter that's already on sale for 50% off, despite the fact it's not even out yet. You quickly realise that you aren't going to be buying any cool stuff. Mission failed, we'll get 'em next time. You then decide that you want to talk to your friends, so you visit the Facebooks. Only joking, no one uses Facebook anymore. Well, except maybe grandma, but you get the point. Everywhere you go, everywhere you browse, you just can't help but get the sense that, damn, the internet really sucks now. If only there was some website that could set us free from this monotony. If only. Before we get on to the actual topic at hand, I'd like to begin by reiterating a brief history of the internet that will explain how we got in this mess in the first place. The internet has undergone 3 clearly observable eras that, depending on how long you've been around, you will either remember or not be aware of at all. The first era lasted roughly 1.5 decades, from around 1990 to around 2005, and has become colloquially known as the Wild West era. This is because in its early days, the internet was often ignored and even mocked by governments and corporations alike, with some even going so far as to even dismiss it as being little more than a fad, if you can believe it. Pretty big fad. And as a result of the internet not being taken quite as seriously as it should have been, it was often overlooked and unregulated, which naturally led to some very nasty consequences. Videos of gore, adult material, and all sorts of criminal activity was, unfortunately, commonplace. Despite these flaws, however, because of its unregulated nature, the internet was also quite free and liberating. It was, as its name implies, an every man for himself kind of environment. No company really had any sort of major monopolistic presence online, and everyone tended to have their own individual website, a slice of this virtual realm that they could call their own. This, however, often resulted in some less than stellar site designs, often symbolised with an obsession with GIFs and moving text. Needless to say, back then, the internet wasn't exactly good-looking, but was certainly full of personality, with interesting and unusual pages around every corner. Overall, during the Wild West era, the internet was very much united as one, whereby everything, both good and bad, was in one place, mostly due to being free from government and corporate oversight, which was both magical and horrifying at the same time. Good times. Not that I really remember, but either way. Starting around 2005, however, the internet would begin to enter its second era, that I like to call the Golden Era. The key defining difference of this era was the consolidation of traffic from thousands of individual sites into a handful of massive ones. Google had defined itself as the one-stop shop of search engines, alongside YouTube for video sharing and Amazon for shopping. MySpace, though not long for this earth, was for many years a blogger's dream. Twitter would bridge the gap between the admirer and the admired, and Facebook would redefine online communication by merging one's real life with the virtual. Now, rather than having to code or pay to get your own slice of the net, you could simply have it for free, no skill required, safe and sound inside of these newfound generous behemoths. And for many years, it was great. Creatives thrived, businesses surged, and people were more interconnected than ever. In the year 2000, there were an estimated 361 million netizens. Just 10 years later in 2010, however, this number had more than quadrupled to almost 2 billion. And these large sites would enjoy much of that growth, with their populations booming with each passing year. And by this point, the internet was certainly no longer being ignored, as the sheer opportunities it provided began to radically transform almost every aspect of society. Governments started to take it seriously and draft legislation to regulate it. And with the consolidation of internet traffic now being on a handful of sites, this wouldn't be that much of a difficult task. Much of the nonsense that plagued the Wild West era would now be washed away, resulting in criminals and other bad actors looking to conduct their foul business hiding in an isolated underground network known as the Deep Web, which, thankfully, only made them easier to catch while staying away from everyone else. Thus, whereas in the Wild West era there was one united internet, now, in the Golden Era, there were two distinct sectors: the criminal internet and the internet for everyone else. And, during these times, the future of the internet seemed very bright indeed. Unfortunately, however, such optimism wouldn't last for long, as the no-cost, low barrier to entry that these large established websites provided would soon be revealed to be a Trojan horse. Man, who could have seen that coming? And thus, starting around 2016, we entered what I like to call the Dark Age era. Ever since the Golden Era, when one wanted to do something on the internet, there was now one big established website that just about everyone used just for that one specific task. But this created a bit of a problem. For example, almost everyone used YouTube to watch videos, so if an organisation made a video, then they'd want to put it on YouTube. But what if YouTube didn't want their organisation's video to be seen? Then their video would go unseen because almost everyone watched videos on YouTube. You see how this works yet? Though using these big sites was very convenient due to their free nature, polished tech, and very established user bases, these conveniences all came at a cost, and that is that you were technically on rented land. No one really owns their Google rankings, Amazon listings, Twitter profiles, YouTube channels, or anything else on such big sites, as one is merely allocated that space by the landlord, aka the company who actually runs the site, which puts everybody under their rules. Now, if these companies remained quite hands-off, just as they were in the Golden Era, only purging content that was considered obscene, such as gore, adult material, or criminal activity, then this would not be that much of a problem. But unfortunately, they didn't stop there, and starting in the Dark Age era, such companies would begin to become very, very heavy-handed. It's no secret that almost all big tech companies reside in one place, California, or more specifically, Silicon Valley. And anyone who knows anything about Silicon Valley will tell you that it is heavily biased towards being socially left-wing. In fact, taking a look at this graph here, you can see that a massive supermajority of employees from practically all of the big tech companies donate overwhelmingly to America's supposed left-wing party. And this lack of diversity of thought would go on to create an artificial cultural bubble around such big tech companies, which isolated themselves away from the rest of the world. And for the people within this bubble, they would slowly become delusional and begin to believe that any alternative views outside of it was not just a mere disagreement, but even a violation, with some even going so far as to call it a crime, if you can believe it. Google would begin artificially promoting certain websites that they deemed as authoritative, while actively burying others. Logic they also applied to videos on their YouTube subsidiary. And likewise, Amazon would flat out remove books it deemed inappropriate from being sold on its market, with Facebook silencing the voices of people and groups who didn't toe the party line.
So, you want to tell us why you've been posting so much misinformation?
If we split internet users up into two types of people, the consumers, aka the people who buy, watch and listen, and the creators, aka the people who sell, create and talk, then the internet, in this form, was a detriment to both. Because consumers were essentially force-fed via algorithms a strict controlled narrative, limiting what websites they could find, what products they could buy, what people they could watch, what videos they could see, and what tunes they could hear. While for creators, they either had to toe the line for such narratives, or have their reach purposely downsized, if not destroyed, completely. Such an artificially unfree environment also naturally increased political polarization, as those who agreed with the Silicon Valley elite were essentially free to say whatever they so pleased without consequence, whereas those who rightfully went against them were shunned over the most minuscule of errors. This has especially had a negative impact on the youth, such as those of us in Generation Z, who have grown up exclusively in such controlled environments, and thus, for the most part, have no idea how much we've been deceived.
Bruh, my favourite streamer told me that abortion is like, totally cool, bro.
Yeah, bro, like killing kids via abortion is like a human right, bro.
Totally, bro.
Of course, in response, alternative websites were set up to protest the established mainstream, but as the only people who tended to use such alternatives were those who were being discriminated against directly, very few others actually saw a reason to switch to them, which only sent a message that the mainstream sites could essentially do as they so pleased. Now you'd think then that Western countries that have the audacity to brand themselves as being the free world would have a big problem with a small handful of out-of-touch Silicon Valley elites telling their multi-billion plus international user base what they can and can't do. Ha! That's funny. As of course, this wasn't the case, because Western government philosophy is fundamentally ignorant, and in some cases, intentionally so. When people in the Western world hear the word oppression, they tend to think exclusively of a George Orwell 1984-style dystopia, whereby a big government tells everyone what to do in an authoritarian manner. This idea is of course based on the numerous totalitarian regimes, both monarchistic, communistic and fascistic, that existed throughout history. And as such, Western people, particularly the Americans, are under the illusion that all forms of oppression spawn exclusively from government, and as such have tried to make their nations have as small, slow and purposely bureaucratic governments as possible. The problem with this, however, is obvious. If government won't step up to power, then a power vacuum is created, a vacuum that is inevitably filled by corporations. The Western world makes almost no real distinction between individuals and corporations, despite the latter being infinitely more powerful. And so long as it's not the government enforcing something, they simply just turn a blind eye to it. Hence why ridiculous situations occur whereby you have a nation like the United States that officially claims on paper that every single one of its citizens have freedom of speech, as per their First Amendment. Yet in reality, actually has their speech controlled by a handful of giant megacorporations. Because as any sycophantic nerd will tell you, freedom of speech only applies to the government. And so what results is not a George Orwell 1984-style dystopia, but an Andrew Ryan Bioshock-style dystopia, whereby cash is king and the poor masses are ultimately at the mercy of a very wealthy out-of-touch elite. But it's somehow even worse than that. Because it's not just that the governments of Western nations merely ignore such consolidation, but actively work with it. It's known now that both Facebook and Twitter even created special closed-off portals just for government agents to rapidly request takedowns of content that disagreed with their policies. Recently, an Official Information Act request was sent to the New Zealand government, asking a very simple question. Has the government, or any division of the government, any member of the government, or any organisation acting on behalf of the government, ever had partner access to Facebook's takedown portal? Within a few weeks, the New Zealand government replied, yes, the Department of Internal Affairs has access to Facebook's takedown portal. That's right, some of the largest technology corporations in the world working hand in hand with Western governments to censor who? You. The US government, under the Biden administration, even dared attempt to create a disinformation governance board, whose job it was to tackle, quote, misinformation. A department that was disbanded just 4 months after it was formed because of the outcry from the American people. If you're gullible enough to believe that you still live in the free world, I've got a bridge to sell you. Ironically enough, this subtle cooperation between powerful corporations and the government actually creates an environment that's barely any different from countries that are supposedly our ideological rivals, such as China. In fact, you could even say that the Western world is even worse in a way, as at least the Chinese don't try to hide the fact that they're authoritarian, and only seem to be so with the express purpose of trying to enrich their nation at large. Whereas in contrast, our Western elites constantly tell us that we are a free people, when in reality, evidently this isn't the case, enforcing such two-faced oppression in the shadows with the express purpose of individualistically enriching themselves at the expense of the masses at large. It feels like Western neoliberal governments say to such corporate behemoths that they'll turn a blind eye to their size so long as they toe the party line and assist them. And, as it turns out, such corporations have zero issues doing so, as they too are neoliberal in nature. That being socially progressive and economically conservative, the unholy combination of our time. And it's because of this syncretic mix that those who are, quote, on the left, despite idealistically being spawned from the ideas of Marx and thus innately anti-corporation, ironically enough, actually tend to betray their economic beliefs because said corporations conveniently tend to socially agree with them. And thus, rather than being enraged at billions of people being under the iron grip of a handful of mega corporations, as they should be, they simply turn a blind eye to it instead. Of which truly shows firsthand just how idealistically hypocritical that the modern left truly are. Meanwhile, those who are, quote, on the right, tend to be gridlocked by their own foolish economic beliefs. As despite being blatantly oppressed, because private companies can do whatever they want, they are essentially fine with being screwed over, clinging on to such flawed idealistic beliefs rather than pragmatically realizing that they are wrong. So essentially, both the mainstream left and mainstream right are both content with this arrangement, much to their own stupidity. Which means that in this Dark Age era, what has happened is yet another sectoral split, but this time into three. The controlled internet, big tech sites used by the vast majority of people, but under the iron grip of the neoliberal ideology. The rebel internet, alternative sites used by less people, but who dissent against them. And the criminal internet for, as stated earlier, actual criminals. And this, ever since 2016, is where the internet has been. Boring, stale, sanitized, controlled, and worst of all, neoliberal. Enter Elon Musk. Elon Musk, the world's richest man, is a very interesting figure, because I tend to find that he's either completely adored by fanboy sycophants who try to make out as if he's the saviour of Earth, or he's either completely despised by envious critics who try to make out as if he's the devil incarnate. But either way, whatever you think of Musk, one thing's for certain, he's certainly influential. Musk claimed to be disturbed by the consolidation of the internet under one ideological arm during the Dark Age era, hence why he expressed desire to enter the social media game.
Like this more and more groupthink amongst the media, more and more sort of towing the line amongst digital social media companies. Basically, just we're traveling the path more and more of suppression of free speech. And this was just getting me concerned. It's like the trends were just very, very bad. So unless something was done to reverse this trend against free speech, then I felt, well, maybe that at some point everything will just get cut off. And unless you're in agreement with whatever the groupthink is, you're just going to be ostracized or your voice will be shut off.
However, building a social media site from scratch, especially at a time when there's already well-established alternatives, is like trying to get blood from a stone. But buying out the already existing establishments outright, however, is easy. That is, if you've got the money, which Musk certainly did. Thus, in October 2022, Musk bought Twitter, one of the world's most popular social media sites, for a staggering $44 billion in a rare all-cash full acquisition. One of the few people in the world who could actually afford to do so. And ever since Musk bought Twitter, the site has changed a lot. Many people who were silenced under the previous neoliberal regime have since been returned, as well as unveiling much of the gross underbelly of how Twitter and the US government would secretly work with each other behind the scenes. On the other hand, however, Musk has also shown an arbitrary refusal to bring back others who were also silenced, as well as suspending others at a whim, which brings his free speech declarations into question. Either way, however, one thing's for certain, and that's that Musk is his own man. And it's clear that this loss of absolute control that the neoliberal establishment once had over Twitter has not been taken lightly. With the US government saying that they're keeping an eye on Twitter, whatever that means, propaganda media outlets trying their best to spread that Twitter is on the verge of death, despite actually doing better than ever, corporate advertiser after corporate advertiser pulling out of Twitter in order to dry out their bank account, and, most importantly of all, the most disgusting neoliberal organisation on earth, the EU, has already started making censorship threats towards Twitter. Is that nervousness I smell? Why is the Western neoliberal establishment so scared of people having freedom of speech? Simple. Because freedom of speech allows the truth to be heard, and the truth hurts liars, and the biggest liars of them all are the Western neoliberal establishment. I had used Twitter back when it first came out in the mid-2000s. In fact, did you know that Twitter's first ever logo used to look like this? I promise you, that's real. Probably the first time in human history that a flat logo was actually an upgrade over a skeuomorphic one. But besides the point. I ended up quickly leaving the site not too long after joining, as I found it to be a completely pointless waste of time, something that I'm sure many of you can no doubt relate to. Today, however, I've changed my tune, and I now think that Twitter is actually the most important website on the internet today. And it's not even close. Because, as juvenile as it may be, it is factually currently the only site in the world that has a large established user base and is not directly under neoliberal control. Twitter, in a way, has broke free from the controlled internet into somewhat resembling a remnant of the golden era internet from times long gone by. Could this be the start of a new era of the internet? A renaissance of sorts? Possibly, because despite all this talk of free speech, advertisers and political drama, in my view, there's an even greater agenda at play here from Musk that I haven't seen a single person discuss. In China, there's an app called WeChat. Now I say an app, but it's really the app. A messaging service, a payment processor, voice conferencing, and social media, all in one. Almost everyone in China who uses the internet uses WeChat, and the super app has over 1 billion active users as such. Musk has made it very clear that his ambitions for Twitter are very much like WeChat. In his words, he wants to create Project X, the everything app, to expand Twitter outwards from merely being what it is today into being the one-stop shop for everyone's internet ventures. A WeChat for the Western world. In a recent internal Twitter presentation, the company showcased a desire to expand into numerous different services, such as encrypted messaging, payments, and even video. The latter of which I obviously find very interesting indeed. It's no secret that I, and probably yourself, have become very disillusioned and disappointed with YouTube in recent years. So much so that I actually made an entire production about just how much it's gone downhill. A website that's been ruined not just by neoliberal ideologues, but an over-reliance on corporate advertisers, at the cost of their users' desires. Because at the end of the day, cash is king, and in social media, advertisers are that cash. Thus, the only way to not have a social media site ruled by advertisers is to not rely primarily on such advertisers, but instead the consumers and creators themselves. And, as it turns out, one of the first things that Musk did upon acquiring Twitter was re-engineering their Twitter Blue subscription service that gives its users numerous perks. An idea which, despite being constantly mocked, I actually think is a most wise idea, as it moves Twitter's financial loyalties away from advertisers into its actual users. Twitter claims that it will increase the video file size limit to a whopping 40 gigabytes and duration limit to 2 hours for its Twitter Blue subscribers, which is no doubt an attempt to compete directly with YouTube. And the idea of Twitter eating into YouTube's market is actually quite interesting, because Twitter could actually be really good in that regard. As whereas on YouTube, discovering creators and being discovered yourself is beyond difficult, primarily due to the highly sanitized corporate algorithm. Hardly anyone is aware that YouTube openly declares that they aim to keep videos that they classify as borderline content under less than 0.5% of all traffic on YouTube. That, by the way, assumedly includes channels like mine, who try their best to explore such neoliberal corruption. Hence why the view-to-quality ratio of mine and other channels similar is artificially low, as they simply do not get recommended via anything but word of mouth, and intentionally so. But on Twitter, however, discoverability has almost been democratized, as users can easily share videos to make them easier to find via the retweet button. And I really can't stress enough how special this could actually be. Twitter, if Musk plays his cards right, could easily become a replacement, or at the very least, an alternative to YouTube, as well as a multitude of other websites, allowing both consumers and creators to break free from the neoliberal shackles. But isn't it quite sad, in a way? Isn't it quite tragic how we have to rely on the world's richest man to not have our speech controlled by a neoliberal cult? But let's just say that Musk pulls off turning Twitter into a Western WeChat. What's to stop him from just becoming like the neoliberals? Nothing. We are left to just put our hands together and hope for the best. Which really just goes to show just how overly reliant we are on the wealthy, and how useless our governments actually are at protecting us. Personally, I'd much rather have a decentralized central database whereby everyone owns their own page, just as the internet was intended to be like. But either way, the facts are that right now at least, if you're someone who despises the current neoliberal regime, then Twitter is factually your current best bet. And I never thought I'd say that, as the site could end up, ironically enough, going from being one of the most sanitized echo chambers on the internet into becoming a bright beacon of truth. Or it could flop, crash and burn into smithereens, but nevertheless, the opportunity is there. So, dear viewer, I highly recommend you head on over to Twitter and join if you haven't already. Because in this culture war against the evils of neoliberalism, truth is the enemy. And you never know when you, and I both, might be unjustifiably censored. And, because I practice what I preach, after almost 20 years of boycotting the site, I have even decided to rejoin Twitter myself. And I really never thought that I'd say that. Naturally, I tried to get the handle @AlexHexagon, but shockingly enough, the name had already been taken, and even, apparently, suspended. To quote the wise words of Shaggy, it wasn't me. I must say I'm quite scared to hear that I apparently have an evil twin out there somewhere who likes to wreak havoc in the world. Keep an eye out, folks. So I ended up doing what everyone does when they're peeved that their name was taken, and simply added the word real in front of it. I think I might have messed up making my profile, however, as for some reason it says that I'm an expert in beauty, cosmetics, and personal care. Shockingly, this is not the case. Nevertheless, I think that Twitter will prove most useful. I can show you interesting things that I found at a whim, and you can show me some interesting things that you found at a whim. I might even start using it to conduct my polls for these productions, and when they implement their planned proper video support, I will absolutely start to upload them there too. I really hope that Twitter blossoms into the bastion of truth that it deserves to be, because my god, do we need it. Alright folks, I hope you enjoyed that. I've got to say I'm very optimistic about the future of Twitter, which could age either like wine or like milk, but I've spent a few days on there, And I gotta say, I've been unbelievably impressed with it. It shows me things that I'm actually interested in, rather than showing me what it wants me to be interested in. And that's a very big change from how social media has worked over these last few years. I can't imagine many of you will be convinced, to be honest with you, to get a Twitter account if you haven't already. I expect only a handful of you to go over there, but really you should, because if you want to know what's actually going on in the world, you can't rely on corporate algorithms. You have to have a free and open platform where you can actually showcase and easily share things that corporations don't want you to talk about. I mean, this is very important. You know, there's a certain irony in a way that I say that freedom isn't the most important virtue that Western society has, but morality. But a part of morality is having the freedom to do the right thing. And so perhaps in a way, the two go hand in hand. I suppose I really mean freedom not to be a clown, I suppose, but whatever. As ever, I'd like to thank the Wall of Famers on Patreon. Welcome to Cute Cumber. Welcome to you, sir. I very much appreciate it. And I'd like to thank Genesis for his increase in the pledge. How kind of you, sir. I'm very charmed. Either way, folks, I hope I'll see you over there. And I'll see you next time.